Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our invitation to tender information session. I'll just wait for a little while just to let everyone arrive. While we're waiting for people to arrive, I'll just go through a few housekeeping functions. Basically, we're unpacking the new invitations to tender here. If you want to ask questions, there will be the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session, but please do put them in the Q&A function, not the chat, the Q&A function. We won't really be monitoring the chat. This webinar will be recorded and we will be making the recording available after the session is over. Okay, so the number of participants rising seems to have dropped a bit, so I'll say again, welcome to our information session on our new invitation to tender. I'm Rob Summers, a research manager at Tazo, and I'll be taking you through some important information about the invitation to tender, an overview of what we're after, a bit about the application process, and you'll also have the opportunity to ask some questions at the end. And as I said before, please do use the Q&A function rather than the chat. So let's start off with some important information. So what is an offer? We are providing you with an independent evaluator to help you evaluate your student support or success initiative. There will be financial support to help with the evaluation. So there's up to £10,000 available if you are just collecting the data and for the impact evaluation. If you are also able to do the implementation and process evaluation, which helps us contextualize the results of the impact evaluation and will involve probably focus groups with or interviews with delivery staff or beneficiaries and data monitoring of the intervention that you're delivering, you'll be able to bid for a further £25,000. But in the first stage of the application process, there'll be no need to think about funding at this point, but I'll come on to that later. Some important application dates. So this is a two-stage application process, which we're trialing for the first time. So the first stage of applications we need in by 7th of March, 1 o'clock. That's via an online form. We'll go away and make a shortlist from those first round of applications, and we will invite what we believe to be feasible interventions for evaluation from the 17th of March onwards, and the deadline for a full application will be the 6th of May. The project is due to run from June to March next year, but it could run beyond March, subject to Tazo being refunded. It's open only to English higher education providers who are in the approved fee cap category. So that is that they've provided an access and participation plan. And we expect providers to take part in the project scoping, which will include the development of a theory of change or the refinement of a theory of change with the evaluator. We expect them to obtain ethical approval for the evaluation, collect and share data related to the impact analysis, and if they wish to and have the skills to do so, collect implementation and process evaluation data and report on that. We will be appointing an independent evaluator, and they will collaborate with you to design the impact evaluation. They will collaborate with you to design the implementation and process evaluation, and they will carry out the impact evaluation and reporting with data that you've shared. And if you don't want, if you aren't able to carry out the IPE, they will do the reporting for that as well. So the overview of the information to tender. We're aiming to provide robust causal evidence of the effectiveness of strategies designed to improve student success and narrow equality gaps. And we were wanting to use randomized control trials or quasi-experimental designs and couple the results of the impact analysis based on those with an implementation and process evaluation that will help us understand why the intervention works or does not work and who it works for and in what contexts it works. any intervention related to student success, where the aim is to narrow equality gaps and the outcomes are available within the time frame of the project. So initially March next year, but hopefully beyond, will be considered a suitable intervention. So, for example, curriculum-based intervention, so curriculum reform, if you're making changes to the kind of teaching you're doing, or the content of modules, that will work out, that will work fine. Any transition-based activities into higher education or between stages within higher education, assuming, of course, that the outcomes that you're interested in are available within the time frame. Interventions prompted by learner analytics systems. These have traditionally been email nudges or phone calls, or app-based nudges, but there may be other interventions that you have, and we'd be certainly interested in evaluating those. Financial support, such as income contingent bursaries, is also on the cards. We don't have a huge amount of causal evidence on that, so if you have one of those interventions, please do submit. We're also looking at mentoring, coaching, or personal academic tutoring and various models of those, and work experience or placements, but again, subject to the outcomes being available within the time frame of the project. To maximise the opportunities for evaluation, we recommend that for new interventions, you would pilot on a randomly selected proportion of students in your institution, not rolling it out to the whole institution, because what you need to be sure of is that your intervention works, but also there aren't backfire effects, i.e. it does harm. So this is what we recommend. It maximizes the opportunities for you to optimize your intervention, but also to evaluate it. So yeah, pilot on a randomly selected selection of students or on a random selection of courses. If you've got an existing intervention that's already running, then you could do some form of A/B testing. And so you'd be maybe making changes to the intervention and testing between one or the other, or perhaps manipulating when the intervention is delivered. Perhaps you have capacity constraints on your intervention, and sort of randomizing who can access the intervention when also helps develop causal evidence, or give us an evaluation plan to develop causal evidence. As I said before, there are options for the implementation and process evaluation. Providers with the capacity and skills are encouraged to develop and carry out their own IPE, co-created with the evaluator. The estimated costs for providers will be £35,000. That includes the collection of data for the impact analysis as well. And providers who do not have the capacity or skills to develop and carry out an IPE can also apply and leave the IPE to the evaluator. And in that case, we'd expect you to be able to do the data collection and initial scoping for about £10,000. The project timeline, we assume that the inception and scoping, which will include refinement of the theory of change, development of the trial protocols, and if applicable, the randomization will occur from June to September. The intervention, delivery and data collection will begin September, October 25. The interim or final reporting, if TASO aren't refunded, will be in March 2026, but should we be refunded, we would expect the final reporting to occur in 2027, which will enable longer term outcome data to be collected. Now the application process. So this year we are trialling a two-stage application process. And the first stage of this process is a much lighter touch information gathering exercise. We're hoping this will encourage providers to submit their application, because they don't have to go into a huge amount of detail about their team or their budgeting, and they can submit the details of their intervention to us so we can evaluate the feasibility of evaluating that intervention. So it's really information from your intervention's theory of change, a description of the outcome, who will be of the intervention, sorry, who will be delivering it, how often it will be delivered, and who the intervention is aimed at, a bit about the sample size and the population. We'll use this information to create a shortlist. Shortlist providers will then be invited to submit a much more detailed application, and we're anticipating that at least 2 providers will be appointed. So the first stage of the application process should be submitted via the online form linked in the ITT guidance, and I'll provide a QR code for a link at the end of this presentation. The necessary information that you will need to provide is listed in the appendix on the ITT guidance webpage. I'd recommend you gathering all that information in before submitting it via the online form. And then please enter that information into the online form by 1 p.m. on Friday, the 7th of March. So I'm going to go briefly through the application form and give you some more detail about what we might expect in the application to provide in the application form. If you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A and they'll either be answered in the chat or we'll answer them live at the end of this session. I think the first 2 points from the application form are fairly obvious. What is the name of your intervention and why are you carrying out the intervention? But then the brief description of the intervention, we will need details about the activities that you are that make up the intervention, who is delivering it, is there any training, how often is it delivered, perhaps details about any materials you might use, and whether it's delivered in person or online, or if it's not delivered directly to students, maybe it's changes to physical or digital infrastructure, sort of details about what those changes are. For the time period of the intervention, this would normally be from when the intervention starts being delivered until the end point, but the start point might be slightly ambiguous. For example, if students have to sign up to take part in the intervention, then we would take the point at which they sign up to it as being the start of the intervention. Then for our target population for the intervention, so this would be maybe you're just interested in first years, maybe it's male students, maybe it's ethnic minority students, but essentially who is the target population for which your intervention is aiming to support. And now we need to know how many of those students are in your institution, because that might be more than the number who you have capacity for to take part in the intervention. And then we need to know more about how individuals will be selected to take part in the intervention. Are they going to be randomly allocated? Is it from courses that have already been selected? Or is it a random selection of courses? If you're not sure, please do indicate, but we would encourage you to think carefully about how they might be selected, and particularly about whether or not you're willing to randomly allocate students or courses to take part or not in the intervention. We also need to know a bit about what is business as usual. So that is what happens to those who aren't taking part of the intervention. So yeah, a bit of a description. If it's a new intervention, particularly what would normally occur. If the intervention exists already, and you're doing sort of this A/B testing where you might be modifying the intervention to part of the target group, then sort of explain what the difference is between the 2 interventions. We also need to know about the outcomes, and if you know what the outcome measures are as well, that will be helpful, and when they become available. So things like attainment, continuation, withdrawal, and student engagement, for example, sort of more behavioural measures, and then non-behavioural measures like belonging or academic self-efficacy. But yeah, indications of what the outcomes are. We've asked for up to 4. If you only have 1 in mind, that's fine, but we'd encourage you to think of at least more than 1 if possible. I would also like to know if you have any historical outcome data for students from the target group prior to the intervention taking place. And that may be from a different cohort, a previous cohort, so it doesn't have to be the same students, but from the same target group. And that helps us estimate the feasibility of running an evaluation, possibly with a quasi-experimental design. And finally, and your answer to this again will not affect our consideration of your application, but it will be helpful for us to know if you wish to carry out the implementation and process evaluation. Our shortlisting criteria are going to be on the feasibility of the evaluation. So we'll be thinking about sample size and related likely statistical power that we might have from your intervention, how measurable the outcomes are and their data availability. We'll also be thinking about the novelty. Is this something a bit different, a bit new? Will encourage us to think about evaluating it, but also the risks to the feasibility of the evaluation. So if this is a brand new intervention, how likely it, how risky is it in terms of will you be ready to run it in September? We can't be more concrete about the shortlisting. We will be preferring interventions we're very confident we can evaluate, but we will be taking things like novelty into account. But if you're not sure, please just submit the intervention. We don't believe it requires a huge amount of work to submit the intervention in this case. We're not asking for huge essays or a fully thought out application. We just would like to know what you're doing so we can see if we can evaluate the best possible interventions that we can. I'll briefly outline this second stage of the application process, which, as I said before, is an invitation only. We'll be requiring details of your team, more detail about the intervention, and we'll probably ask very specific questions based on the information you provided in the first stage. And we'll also require a budget about how you are going to use the money. The money can be used, is generally used to pay for staff time to collect data, maybe a research assistant if you're doing the implementation and process evaluation, to do focus group or interviews, maybe also for rewards for taking part in focus group and interviews and so on is fine. We'll also ask for high-level details of the implementation and process evaluation if you are going to be taking part in that. And we anticipate sending out invitations for the second stage of the application process, the week commencing the 17th of March. And the deadline will be 1 o'clock on the 6th of May for the second stage. So it's now time for any questions that you may have. And while please again put these in the Q&A function, not the chat. And while we're waiting for questions, I'll just have a quick summary of what is available. There's a QR code that links to the invitation to tender page on the TASO website. So the funding is between 10 and 35k, dependent on whether or not you're doing an IPE. You must be based in England in an approved fee cap category. The first stage application deadline is 1 p.m. On the 7th of March. And for those shortlisted on that first stage, the second stage deadline will be the 6th of May at 1 o'clock. The time frame of the project is June 25 to March 26, or if we can extend the project to early 2027. So thank you. And I will pass over to Paul, I think, who will be able to ask me any questions that come up.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for that presentation. That was really clear. And just to say a quick good morning to colleagues that have joined us today, and thank you for joining us. So my name is Paul Fenton-Villa. I'm the head of evaluation at TASO, and so I've been busy trying to collect some of your various questions today that you provided us. And Rob, so I'll start from the top and we'll work our way down. Um, and I'm quite happy to also contribute to answering some of these questions where that's helpful. So the first question that we received today was just a clarification on the geography um, of, uh, of eligible applicants. Um, so the question asked whether Scottish institutions would be eligible to apply for this opportunity.
No, I'm afraid not. Because we're funded by the OFS, which covers English higher education only, and we are dedicated to providers with the with access and participation plans. I'm afraid it has to be an English higher education provider who are in the approved fee cap category.
Yeah. And sorry, I should also introduce Christoph. Christoph, do you want to introduce yourself as well to the call?
Yes, hello. Nice to meet you all. I'm the Christoph Kobitz. I'm the Chief Research Officer here at TASO.
Yeah, thanks, Christoph. If there's anything that you'd like to add, feel free to comment as well. So the second question that we received today was whether the funding for the IPE can be spent on a new temporary role, or can it be used for existing staff?
Either is fine. You can buy out time for existing staff or appoint research assistants. But yeah, either is fine.
Brilliant. So our next question is, can an institution send more than one application? So for example, for two different interventions?
Yes, absolutely. And they will be considered independently as well.
Brilliant. And so our next question is quite specific. It asks whether so uh, so the intervention is a transition program offered to offer holders. Um, you mentioned a scoping and a randomization process might take place in July. So would you need a final list of students,
Yeah,
and when?
this is a difficult one. I would still encourage you to submit this evaluation if you have the details, but this might be difficult to be feasible in the time frame of this project, given that we will only start the scoping exercise in June. So I don't want to put you off from submitting, but I think it is likely to be difficult for us to evaluate in this context.
Yeah, I guess more broadly, Rob, there might be interventions that are dependent on the new cohort of students. Um, is there anything more that we can say about those types of interventions?
I think yes, I'm expecting to understand. I'm expecting to receive applications that will only be for interventions that will only be targeted at level 4 students, so first year undergraduates. And given that we'd be expecting probably to do any randomization in September, October, then that would be absolutely fine.
Okay, brilliant. Um, uh, Another question. So is there an opportunity to discuss plans with TASO before submitting an application form?
You can certainly email us questions at research@taso.org.uk. We think that the application process is so light touch that it's probably worth your while just submitting anyway. But if you do have specific questions, please do get in touch.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. And so the next question is, so one participant is indicating that they're planning to carry out an implementation and process evaluation of a pilot of an intervention this year. So do you think piloting and running an IPE would impact our application?
Um,
So this
yeah,
Eric 11:19 a.m.
okay, so I th I think that would be okay. It, from what I can see from the time frame, we would expect the implementation. Oh, I see. So actually, is this? I'm assuming now this is the implementation process evaluation happening at the end of the current academic year rather than next academic year. Again, this might be difficult to do. We would expect the implementation process evaluation to occur at the beginning of the next academic year.
Yeah. Although, so I think if there are interventions that are already undergoing a pilot, that may be that might act as a proof of concept that the intervention can run at a university and be delivered. So if you're already doing an implementation and process evaluation of this year's pilot, I think that's fine. I think what we would look to do next year is maybe scale that up a little bit in terms of adding on the impact evaluation, and we would probably want to, in any case, do another IPE just to supplement that impact evaluation, because it does also provide us some additional information about the delivery in that specific year of the intervention as well. So I don't think necessarily existing pilots would prohibit further evaluation in this case. Our next question is, can you give more details about what you mean by student success, Rob?
Yes, sure. I mean, any of the OFS student success measures, such as student attainment, continuation and progression, is fine. But also, student withdrawal would be seen as an outcome measure that would fit in with the project. But also measures like academic self-efficacy and belonging, if you can get sufficient sample sizes that from your student population, would also fit in with this. Given that the project may have to end in March, we do accept that some outcome measures may have that would normally occur after March, we may have to drop for now. But as long as there are some outcome measures that in a theory of change you would be part of a causal pathway to student success, such as attainment, retention, etc., then that would be fine.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. So we've had a number of questions just relating back to a previous question, which is whether an institution can submit more than one application to the first stage. And I think we've clarified that certainly we're happy to take multiple applications from the same institution. Rob, one question is asking whether any more details could be provided as to what can be budgeted. So, for example, you've mentioned a research assistant. Is there anything else that could also be budgeted that you might be able to refer to?
Yes, so often people need to provide some form of recognition that people have taken part in focus groups or interviews, so the budget can go towards that. But just to reiterate, there's no need to worry about the budget at this point in the application process. We'll only be expecting a budget in the second stage, and we'll give full guidance about the kind of things that can be applied for at that point.
Brilliant. And you mentioned at least two. Oh, sorry, it's mentioned that at least 2 projects will be funded in this funding round. Is there an upper limit on the number of projects that we funded, and can you indicate what this is dependent on?
I think I'm going to pass this back to you, Paul.
Yeah. I'm quite happy to take this, but Christoph, if you yeah, okay, I'm quite happy to take this. So I think we I mean, our upper limit is contingent on the maximum funds that we have available for this funding round, so those funds we expect would be able to fund at least 2 evaluations, probably more than that actually. But as I say, I think the exact number of evaluations we'll be funding this year will depend on the applications and the actual interventions we intend to evaluate and the costs of those different evaluations. So I don't think at this point we can put an exact number on how many evaluations we intend to fund this year, as that will also depend a little bit on the specifics of the evaluations as well.
Yeah, thanks. And on our available funds, so our plan is to allocate the funds that we have in a way that achieves maximum impact in terms of the evidence that can be generated, and is therefore then helpful to the sector as a whole. So that's another thing that's driving our decisions here. This is not likely to be the last opportunity, or the only and last opportunity that TESO is engaging the sector with, but at the moment that's what we can communicate with confidence, that there will be at least 2 projects funded out of this pot.
And so for the unsuccessful applicants, will there be an opportunity for feedback?
For the first stage application, there won't be an opportunity for individual feedback because we're anticipating a lot of applications as a result of us changing the application process. If we may try and give some general feedback based on what we see from the applications and the ones that we believe to be unsuccessful and the reasons for that. But no, we won't be able to provide individual feedback. At the second stage, we will be able to do so.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rob. So one question is, can submissions be made by individuals? Is there a preference for collaborative submissions? So same discipline, interdisciplinary?
I'm not sure I understand this question, I'm afraid.
So I think that the submission would have to be made in collaboration with your institution. So there would need to be an institutional intervention, or the university intervention that's being submitted. So we wouldn't expect a submission from an individual without the without the collaboration of and authority of their own institution to submit that application. However, if there are multiple individuals within that institution that want to collaborate and submit that application together, I think that would be certainly welcome. Yes. Yeah. So related to this question, I guess in some ways, so are we interested in collaborative projects? So 2 or more institutions working on the same research project together?
Absolutely, yes. In this case, you would probably have to share the up to 35k funding between you, but not necessarily. It may be that we do decide that two institutions are doing something related or very similar, but in a different context, and we might consider funding both of those to the full. But yes, we're absolutely interested in collaborative projects. So if you are working with other institutions, or there's an intervention that you are delivering across institutions, please do submit it.
Okay. So I've just for the moment lost my place. Here we are. So one question is referring specifically to evaluating initiatives aimed at reducing gaps in progression to highly skilled work or further study, and because of the time lags to the results of the graduate outcome survey, whether we can suggest other alternative outcome measures.
Yeah, absolutely. Completion, a good degree, or the overall mark in your degree would be approximate outcome on the way to highly skilled work. And also, if you've got the ability to survey your graduates not long after graduation, that would also count as well. but yeah, intermediate outcomes on the way to highly skilled work would be acceptable.
Brilliant. And are APP interventions appropriate to submit, or does it have to be a new intervention?
They are appropriate, absolutely.
For institutions with evaluation staff, is TASO, the evaluator, happy to collaborate, or would they expect it to be the sole person / project lead?
We the way What Works centres work is through an independent evaluator. This provides you with an external view of your intervention and the evaluation, and it's always likely to improve your evaluation. There is nothing stopping you from doing your own impact analyses, but we would still want the independent evaluator to do the impact evaluation themselves, separate from you, but it still will be a collaboration. The trial protocol will be developed by the independent evaluator, but in collaboration with you. So yes, we would expect the evaluator to do the impact evaluation that we would publish as part of the project, but that does not stop you from doing your own.
Yeah. Brilliant. And would multi-interventions be considered under this funding?
Yes, but only if they sit comfortably in a single theory of change. Now, this may be multiple interventions are part of a whole provider approach. In that case, it might be better to submit individual interventions for evaluation, because that likely the individual interventions have different outcomes that contribute to an overall whole provider strategy. So I would think it most likely that it would be better to submit them as individual ones, but not necessarily if they fit nicely in a single theory of change with a very small number of outcome related outcome measures.
It's a slightly more technical question now. So do you have a number in mind for the amount of students reached by the intervention? And presumably that would be included in the overall evaluation if there is also a control group.
To run an effective randomized control trial where you're individually randomly allocating, you're going to need at least 100 students in each group, but preferably quite a bit more. But that is dependent on so many other factors. Giving you a sample size alone is not sufficient. So if you've got over 100 students in your control who aren't receiving the intervention, over 100 who are, please submit your do consider submitting your application, and we will consider it. But the greater number of students who take part in the intervention and also the larger in the control comparator group, the better.
And how many, so this is just a clarification on how many applications will be taking forward to round 2 of the application process?
At the moment, I can't answer that question, really. I would hope that at least 6, but I would expect it to be more than that. But it will be dependent on how feasible we see the first stage of application interventions are to evaluate, and also the amount of funding that we have available to run evaluations.
So this is a quite specific question, but it's so you've previously mentioned work placements and employability rates being an example of student success.
Yes, I think so. Probably employability to a graduate job, graduate level job, or to postgraduate study.
Brilliant. And so this is again another clarification. So you suggest pilot a type of evaluation that might be possible as a pilot with either randomly selected students or programs, and existing activity, so A/B testing, or manipulating delivery mode. Is that what you're looking from for these submissions?
This was more guidance on if you are rolling out an intervention, giving you the maximum opportunity to evaluate it, understand it, optimize your intervention, and minimize the risk of harm, if there are any. So if you'd already planned to roll out a new intervention to your whole student body next year, I would urge you to rethink that and consider how you might be better off piloting it in a smaller proportion of your student population first. And these are possible ways of doing that. So when we ask in the application form how you might decide who is or who is not taking part in the intervention, whether it's on a random basis or randomly by course or so on, that's sort of the kind of thing we're asking you to think about. If you don't know at this point, but know that you can deliver it only to a proportion of students, then just indicate that in the application form.
And so if you had several outcome measures where the most feasible, if you had several outcome measures, presumably some of these being feasible within the March 26 timeframe, but one was more longitudinal, and we took responsibility for evaluating that ourselves, would that be acceptable?
Absolutely, yes. We would encourage that kind of evaluation, and we would even consider putting those long-term outcome measures as part of the trial protocol in advance. We publish trial protocols prior to the intervention taking place, if we can, or certainly the data being shared with the independent evaluator, known as pre-registration, and this provides us with clarity and it provides anyone reading our impact evaluations with the certainty that we'd already decided how we were going to evaluate the data before it had been collected, which makes the findings more robust. And given that many of our projects previously, that outcome measures have not been available within the time frame, we would absolutely want to work with you to make sure that we can evaluate, we have a plan for you to evaluate those outcome measures ahead of time, so that would work.
And so this is another question going back to the IPE, and the question is, how much support will TASO provide if the HEP does the IPE themselves?
So we will be managing the contracts, and we will also provide QA on outputs, including the trial protocol and reporting. We will be appointing the independent evaluator, and part of their remit, if they're not doing the IPE, will be, regardless of whether they're doing the IPE or not, part of their remit will be to design with you the IPE protocol, and so they will help the design of that, so that because it needs to be designed in tandem with the impact evaluation, so we can understand as much about the impact evaluation as possible. So you will have support, but you would be expected to have sufficient capability to run, for example, focus groups or surveys and analyze that data.
So the next couple of questions that we received, I think, relate to our previous responses. So will feedback be given to unsuccessful applicants? I think we've clarified. So in stage one, we will not be providing specific feedback to applicants, but we may provide more general feedback to the applicant pool. However, in stage two, for those applicants that are invited to provide a more detailed application, we will be able to provide individual feedback on each of those applications. Another the next question was, what level of support would be provided by the independent evaluator? I don't know if there's anything in addition to your previous response, Rob.
There'll be some refinement of your theory of change, if or development of one if you don't have one, though we would hope that you do. And there will be the people we have appointed as evaluators before are often experts in the field. They're certainly experts in evaluation, and they can help you design the rollout of an intervention if it isn't already planned and you're happy for that. They can even suggest modifications to the intervention as well, if based on their experience, that might improve the intervention and the impact on its outcomes. So the level of support can vary dependent on your willingness to accept it to some extent, but also what you need as well. But they will be developing the impact analysis protocol and co-creating the implementation process evaluation protocol with you.
So a question about outcomes, Rob. So if the project stops in March, how can we measure degree outcomes, which usually come in June?
Then hopefully you may have some data from the end of the first semester in terms of module marks, which could be an intermediate outcome. But we are hopeful and confident that we will, the project will be able to go on beyond March. But the trial protocol will be designed as though the project was going beyond March. So even if we're not around to collect the to help analyze the outcome data, we would provide you with a means of doing so yourself.
But I guess just to clarify, we are expecting that that we will still be around, yeah. which is what's important. Is there a planned event where successful institutions can present their findings at the end of the projects?
We haven't yet discussed the final comms of the project yet, but that is something we've had in mind for our current round of projects, and it's something we're considering. So watch this space is all I can say.
Yeah, I think certainly we would, dissemination is an important part of our work. So having that platform to present findings and learning is, I think, something that we'd certainly want to facilitate for everyone involved. Has the independent evaluator already been appointed, and if not, how you decide who that is?
No, they haven't been appointed, and we will use our usual process, which is that we have a panel of evaluators, but we also have specific evaluators in mind who we know have experience in this area. And we will, given that we are restricting the kinds of impact evaluation to randomized controlled trials or quasi-experimental designs, we will use evaluators who we know have experience in that area.
So the next question is just a clarity on some of the specifics of the potential designs that could be included. So if we were planning to, so a clarity on if we were planning to randomize courses for an intervention, would there be a minimum number of courses that you think should be included for intervention and control to make the statistical analysis meaningful?
Yes. I'm not sure what that is, and I will pass that on to Paul, who I think has more experience of cluster randomization than I do.
Yeah, so I think when we're choosing the sample size for, or the ideal sample size for any study, as Rob has mentioned before, will depend on the number of factors. If the intervention is distributed at an individual level, so there's variation, so effectively, for example, you might randomize individuals within a school or a course to a particular intervention status, then that's probably one of the most powerful designs that you can use in terms of being able to detect the effects of that intervention. But in some cases, those interventions simply can't be distributed in or established in that same way. So you may have to randomize, for example, by course, or you may have to randomize at a slightly more aggregated level than at the individual level. The sample or the ideal sample size in those cases is complicated by an issue called clustering. So clustering is it's related to how correlated individuals' outcomes are within each of those clusters. So if you're randomizing at a course level, your course is considered a cluster, and so we have to take into account how correlated individuals' outcomes are within an individual course. It's very difficult ex ante, so before we do the design and before we run the evaluation, to exactly estimate the right number of clusters that will be kind of the minimum requirement, and we will have to kind of look at the details of those interventions and evaluations and outcomes on a case-by-case basis. So what I suggest is that if you do have an intervention that's distributed at a cluster level, so at a course level or something similar, that you submit, and that we will obviously review the details of your submission, and we'll be able to indicate to you whether we kind of think this is a feasible number of clusters in order to do an evaluation. One thing that we probably wouldn't advise at this point is that if the interventions are distributed at a school level, so if you've only got a very small number of schools, so 10, 20 schools within your university, and you're distributing among those schools, so maybe 10 schools receive the intervention and 10 schools do not, I think that's particularly a more tricky case to do an evaluation because of the issues of clustering and statistical power. And so probably we would be more likely and more convinced by interventions that are being implemented at a level that's below the school level. So the course or the individual level would be potentially more convincing at this point. But I think we have to consider all of the opportunities that you kind of want to present to us and apply with. We would consider that on a case-by-case basis. I don't know if there's anything else that Rob or Christoph you might want to add to that. No. Okay. But if you're not sure, please do feel free to reach out to us as well for further clarity, because we do appreciate that actually sample size selection and clustering is quite a technical and tricky subject. So we are happy to try and answer questions or further questions on that issue in particular. So the final question that we have for today is we would consider interventions rolled out at a whole institution level, although not all students are engaging with it.
It depends on the reasons for the lack of engagement. If that's correlated with motivation, then that's going to be a problem. Perhaps you can get around this to some extent with a randomized encouragement design. So you randomly promote the intervention to a random subsection of students, but it's better that if you are rolling out to the whole institution, maybe if you've got no evidence or no robust evidence of the positive or perhaps even negative effects of your intervention, I would advise you to not roll it out to the whole institution and try and pilot it on a proportion of your students first. I don't know if, Paul, you've got anything to add to that.
No, yeah, I think that covers everything I'd probably want to say as well. So I think that takes us to the end of our Q&A session today. I don't know, Rob, if you want to say some final words to wrap up the session.
Please do submit your application. We are interested to hear your feedback on the application process. We've designed this to encourage more applications because we're concerned that the tendering process before that required a lot of detail about your team and your budgeting might have put people off from applying. So we're hoping that you will submit your interventions for consideration. But yes, any feedback on the application process will be welcome as well. And we are able to answer questions up until the 28th of February via research@taso.org.uk. There will also be a recording of the webinar going out, and other frequently asked questions we'll provide the answers to as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for attending, everyone, and we look forward to catching up again soon.